Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a tale so bizarre, so utterly Roman, it almost feels like a dream, or perhaps a very vivid hallucination. Imagine, if you will, the opulent halls of an imperial palace, the whispers of intrigue, the clinking of goblets, and then the distinct neigh of a horse, echoing through the marble corridors as if it owns the place. You find yourself in ancient Rome, a city of gladiators and emperors, philosophers and plebeians, and in this particular era, a city where a horse might just have had a better social standing than most of you watching right now. Yes, you probably wouldn't survive a day, let alone thrive, in such a place, especially if your stablemate was trying to outrank you. Tonight, our journey takes us into the peculiar and utterly captivating world of Emperor Caligula and his most cherished companion, a horse named Incitatus. This isn't just a story about a man and his steed. It's a window into the mind of one of Rome's most infamous rulers and the lengths to which imperial eccentricity could stretch. We'll explore the lavish life of a horse who, according to some ancient sources, was considered for a consulship. Yes, a horse in the Roman Senate. Just imagine the filibustering. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, perhaps drifting off to the gentle sounds of distant Roman chatter or the soft clop of a horse's hooves, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where everyone is tuning in from as we embark on these sleepy historical adventures together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing, or perhaps gently swaying, in the bustling heart of Rome, around the year 37 CE. The city hums with life, a vibrant tapestry of sounds and smells. You can almost feel the cobblestones beneath your bare feet, surprisingly cool in the Roman air, if you were actually there, which, let's be honest, you're not. You're safely tucked away, listening to my voice, which is far less pungent than ancient Rome. You hear the distant cries of street hawkers, the rumble of wooden carts, and the incessant chatter of a populace going about their day. But our focus isn't on the everyday Roman. Oh no. We're heading straight for the top, or rather, towards the very peculiar center of the Roman world, the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. This isn't just any palace. It's the home of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known by his childhood nickname, Caligula, meaning Little Boot, a moniker he received from the soldiers during his early travels with his father, Germanicus. Imagine being the most powerful man in the known world, and everyone still calls you Boot Y. Quite humbling, isn't it? Caligula's reign, though brief, lasting only from 37 to 41 CE, was marked by extravagance, erratic behavior, and a penchant for the unconventional. This is where our story truly begins, as you approach the grand entrance, perhaps trying to sneak past the imperial guards without drawing too much attention. Good luck with that. They're probably more vigilant than your average neighborhood watch. Now, Caligula's early reign actually began with a promising start. He was initially popular with the Roman people and the army, largely due to the revered memory of his father, Germanicus, a beloved general. Caligula even initiated some popular public works and political reforms. For a brief period, he was seen as a benevolent ruler, a stark contrast to his tyrannical predecessor, Tiberius. But as time wore on, a different side of Caligula began to emerge, a side that would lead to some of the most outlandish stories in Roman history, including the one that brings us here tonight. Historians still argue whether his erratic behavior was due to genuine madness, a severe illness he suffered early in his reign, or perhaps a deliberate act of theatrical tyranny designed to assert absolute power over the Roman elite. It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? Was he truly mad, or just a very dedicated method actor? But before we delve deeper into the emperor's mind, let's introduce the other star of our show, the one who arguably received more pampering than most Roman senators, Incitatus. This isn't just any horse. This is the horse. A magnificent creature, a Spanish horse with a coat as white as fresh snow, or perhaps as white as the toga you forgot to wash. You can almost see him now, prancing through the palace grounds, his mane flowing in the gentle Roman breeze, utterly oblivious to the political machinations swirling around him. Or was he? Perhaps he understood more than anyone gave him credit for. After all, he had a front-row seat to imperial power. As you continue your journey, perhaps still contemplating the life of a pampered Roman horse, you might wonder, where did Incitatus come from? Was he born into luxury, perhaps a blue-blooded steed from a long line of imperial racehorses? Or was his ascent to fame a classic Roman rags to riches, or rather, stable to palace, story? Well, while details about Incitatus's earliest days are, like many historical tidbits, a bit murky and subject to scholarly debate, we can piece together some fascinating possibilities. You see, Incitatus wasn't just some random horse plucked from a field. He was, by all accounts, a prize-winning racehorse. Roman society, much like our own, had a profound love for competitive sports, and chariot racing was arguably the most popular spectator sport in the entire empire. Imagine the roar of the crowds in the Circus Maximus, the thunder of hooves, the chariots careening around the Spina, and the sheer exhilaration as your favorite team crosses the finish line. It was utterly thrilling, and professional racers, both human and equine, were superstars. Incitatus, belonging to the Greens faction, one of the four major chariot racing teams, the others being the Blues, Reds, and Whites, was a celebrated champion. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a mainstream historical fact that these factions had immense followings, often inciting fierce rivalries that could spill out into violent street brawls. So, our equine friend was already famous, a four-legged celebrity, before he even caught the emperor's eye. Now, picture this. You're at the Circus Maximus, nestled among 250,000 screaming fans. That's roughly twice the capacity of the largest modern football stadiums, just to put it into perspective. The sun beats down, the dust rises, and Incitatus, with his pristine white coat, is pulling his chariot, his muscles rippling, his eyes fixed on the finish line. He's a magnificent specimen, known for his speed, stamina, and perhaps a certain regal demeanor. It's not hard to imagine how such a creature would capture the attention of an emperor, especially one with a penchant for grandiosity like Caligula. You might even find yourself cheering along, completely forgetting your quest for sleep. Don't worry, we'll get back to that calm, sleep-inducing rhythm soon. Historians still argue whether Caligula's fascination with Incitatus was purely a personal affection for an animal, a manifestation of his growing megalomania, or a calculated political statement designed to mock the Roman Senate and aristocracy. Was he genuinely fond of the horse, or was he using Incitatus as a prop in his elaborate, terrifying theatrical performance as emperor? The truth is likely a blend of all these factors. It's not uncommon for powerful figures to develop intense relationships with animals, often finding solace and unquestioning loyalty where they might find none among their human courtiers. Think of famous generals and their war horses, or even modern-day leaders and their beloved pets. But Caligula, as we'll see, took this bond to an entirely new level. Before Incitatus became the emperor's personal favorite, his life was likely one of rigorous training and competitive pressure. Chariot horses were incredibly valuable, both for their athletic prowess and their breeding potential. They lived a life of luxury by equine standards, fine stables, dedicated grooms, and the best feed. They weren't just animals. They were investments, assets in a multi-million sesterces industry. Imagine the pressure. Every race, every gallop, a potential win or loss of immense sums. You wouldn't want to be the stable master who let a champion horse stub his hoof, would you? So, Incitatus's early life, while perhaps not filled with the silver troughs and purple blankets he would later enjoy, was far from humble. He was a champion, a star in the Roman public eye, accustomed to adoration and fanfare. This pre-existing celebrity status might have been part of his appeal to Caligula, who, despite his immense power, was always keen on public adoration and displays of his own unique grandeur. It's a curious tidbit, isn't it, how a society that prized military conquest and philosophical discourse could also be so utterly obsessed with horse racing. It really shows the full spectrum of Roman interests, from the brutal efficiency of their legions to the passionate chaos of the hippodrome. You can almost hear the distant faint echoes of the Circus Maximus now, the cheers, the thundering hooves, the jingle of harness bells. It's a powerful image, one that sets the stage for the increasingly bizarre turn Incitatus's life would take. From the dust and glory of the racetrack, he was about to be elevated to a position beyond the wildest dreams of any human, let alone an animal. This journey, from champion racer to imperial confidant, is what makes his story so utterly unique in the annals of history. And it all began with one emperor's singular, perhaps obsessive, fascination. As the gentle hum of our historical journey continues, let's shift our gaze from Incitatus, the celebrated racehorse, back to the man who elevated him to unprecedented heights, Emperor Caligula. You're still gently swaying, perhaps feeling the calming rhythm of ancient Rome as we delve into the unpredictable ascent and early reign of this fascinating, yet often terrifying, figure. Caligula's full name, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, tells a story in itself. He was born into the heart of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a lineage that included Augustus and Tiberius. His father, Germanicus, was a highly popular and respected general, a hero to the Roman people. You might recall him from history as the adopted son of Tiberius, a man whose popularity sometimes overshadowed that of the reigning emperor. This familial connection meant Caligula was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and a golden toga, practically. His early life was spent in military camps with his parents, which is where he earned his famous nickname, Caligula, meaning little boot, from the miniature military boots he wore as a child. Imagine being the most powerful man in the world, and everyone still calls you Boot Y. When Emperor Tiberius died in 37 CE, Caligula was positioned as a strong contender for the throne. He was the great-grandson of Augustus, the grandson of Germanicus, and he had the backing of the Praetorian Guard, the elite personal bodyguards of the Roman emperors. You might think this all sounds rather smooth, like a well-oiled machine, but Roman imperial succession was often a messy, brutal business. Rivals were eliminated, alliances shifted, and the path to power was paved with both ambition and fear. Yet, for Caligula, the transition was remarkably peaceful. The Senate readily acknowledged him, and the people rejoiced. Initially, Caligula's reign was met with immense optimism and popularity. He released political prisoners, abolished a detested sales tax, and staged lavish games and gladiatorial contests, which were always a surefire way to win over the Roman populace. You can almost hear the cheers of the crowd now, if you listen closely, a faint echo from 2 millennia ago. He was seen as a benevolent and promising ruler, a welcome change from the reclusive and suspicious Tiberius. For the first few months, everything seemed to be going swimmingly, like a well-designed Roman aqueduct. However, this honeymoon period was tragically short-lived. Around 8 months into his reign, Caligula fell gravely ill. The exact nature of his illness is still debated by historians. Some suggest it was encephalitis, others a nervous breakdown, while some ancient sources hint at a poisoning. Whatever the cause, this illness marked a dramatic turning point in his behavior. When he recovered, the good emperor seemed to vanish, replaced by the erratic, cruel, and megalomaniacal figure who would become infamous. You can almost feel the shift in the imperial atmosphere, from one of cautious hope to one of growing dread. It's like watching a gentle stream suddenly turn into a raging torrent, completely unpredictable and potentially destructive. This is where the mainstream historical fact of his early popularity gives way to the quirky and often terrifying aspects of his later reign. His actions became increasingly bizarre. He spent exorbitant amounts of money on lavish projects, declared himself a living god, and indulged in cruel whims, often humiliating or executing senators and other prominent figures on a whim. He famously ordered a bridge to be built across the Bay of Baiae so he could ride his horse across it, simply to defy an astrological prophecy. Imagine the engineering nightmare. And the bill. You'd think he'd have better things to do, like balancing the imperial budget, or perhaps investing in better public baths. Historians still argue whether Caligula's post-illness behavior was a result of physical brain damage, a pre-existing psychological instability exacerbated by power, or a cynical, calculated strategy to terrorize the Roman elite into absolute submission. Was he truly insane, or was he a ruthless, theatrical tyrant using madness as a tool? This debate forms the core of understanding his actions, including his relationship with Incitatus. It's a fascinating puzzle, isn't it? The difference between madness and absolute power can be a very fine line, especially when you're dealing with an emperor who had no one to tell him no. And this erratic behavior set the stage for Incitatus's remarkable, and perhaps perilous, rise to prominence within the imperial court. As the sun of Caligula's erratic reign continued its ascent, casting long, strange shadows across Rome, so too did the star of Incitatus begin to truly blaze. You're now drifting through the imperial palace, perhaps catching a whiff of expensive perfumes mingling with the ever-present faint smell of hay and stable, a testament to the horse's growing presence. This is where Incitatus's prominence truly began to take hold, moving from simply a champion racer to a favored companion, and eventually to something far more outlandish. Caligula's affection for Incitatus grew to an obsessive degree. It wasn't just a simple fondness for a magnificent animal. It was an all-consuming passion that bordered on the bizarre. Imagine the scene. While senators waited for an audience, enduring endless delays, Caligula might be found in the stables, personally feeding Incitatus, or murmuring sweet nothings into his ear. You might even catch a glimpse of the emperor brushing the horse's flowing mane. His powerful hands, which could sign death warrants with a flick of the wrist, now gently tending to his beloved steed. It's a curious contrast, isn't it, between the terrifying tyrant and the doting horse owner? The emperor ordered the construction of a lavish marble stable for Incitatus, complete with an ivory manger. Yes, ivory, not your average wooden trough. The horse was also provided with purple blankets, dyed with the highly expensive Tyrian purple, a color traditionally reserved for emperors and high-ranking officials. And if that wasn't enough, Incitatus even had a jeweled collar, sparkling with precious stones. You might find yourself wondering if your own bed sheets are as luxurious as a Roman emperor's horse's blanket. Probably not. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a mainstream historical fact that Caligula showered Incitatus with immense luxury. Ancient historians like Suetonius meticulously detailed these extravagant provisions, often using them as prime examples of Caligula's perceived madness and excessive behavior. For them, Incitatus's opulent lifestyle was not just a sign of affection, but a clear indicator of the emperor's declining sanity and his disdain for traditional Roman values and institutions. Imagine the gossip among the Roman elite. Did you hear? The horse just got a bigger dining room than my villa. Historians still argue whether these lavish gifts were purely expressions of Caligula's eccentricity, or if they served a more cynical purpose. Was he genuinely infatuated with Incitatus, treating him as an equal or even superior to his human courtiers? Or was this a deliberate act of mockery, designed to humiliate the Roman Senate and aristocracy by elevating an animal above them, demonstrating his absolute and arbitrary power? Some scholars suggest that by giving the horse such luxuries, Caligula was sending a clear message: I can do whatever I want, and you can't stop me, even if it means my horse lives better than you. It's a rather aggressive power move, when you think about it, even if it is adorable for the horse. Incitatus's status wasn't just confined to the stables. He was often invited to imperial banquets, where he would reportedly sit at the table with the emperor, dining on gilded oats from a golden goblet. Imagine being a foreign dignitary, waiting for an audience with the most powerful man in the world, only to find yourself sharing dinner with a horse who is clearly enjoying his meal more than you are. You might even feel a pang of jealousy. He gets a golden goblet? My emperor only gives me a silver one. The level of meticulous care and attention given to Incitatus was unparalleled. He had a retinue of 18 servants dedicated solely to his well-being, ensuring his stables were spotless. His feed was perfectly prepared, and his every whim was catered to. This kind of pampered existence, while not entirely unheard of for prized animals, reached an absurd peak under Caligula. It really makes you wonder about the Roman economy. How much did all those gilded oats cost? And did the servants get paid in sesterces, or just leftover hay? The transition from racehorse to imperial confidant was gradual, but once it began, it accelerated rapidly. Incitatus became less of an animal and more of a symbol, a living embodiment of Caligula's unpredictable and absolute rule. His presence at the palace became a daily reality, a constant reminder of the emperor's peculiar priorities. This elevation wasn't just about luxury. It was about integration into the very fabric of imperial life, setting the stage for even more outlandish rumors and pronouncements. As Incitatus's star continued to rise in the bizarre firmament of Caligula's court, his daily life transformed into one of unimaginable luxury and meticulous care. You might imagine a horse's typical routine: grazing in a field, perhaps a daily trot around a simple stable. But Incitatus? Oh no, his routine was far more akin to that of a pampered Roman noble, meticulously planned and executed by a dedicated staff. You're now virtually slipping into the opulent stables themselves, perhaps trying not to trip over an ivory-inlaid water trough. First, let's talk about his accommodations. Incitatus wasn't housed in any ordinary stable. Caligula had a magnificent marble stable built for him, complete with ivory mangers. Imagine that, your horse eating from a feeder carved from elephant tusks. It's almost as extravagant as having a solid gold toilet, but perhaps slightly more practical for a horse. The stable walls were reportedly polished to a mirror-like sheen, possibly adorned with frescoes depicting Incitatus's past racing triumphs, or perhaps just a very large portrait of Caligula admiring his horse. You can almost feel the cool, smooth marble under your fingers, if you were actually there. Beyond the luxurious stable, Incitatus's bedding was legendary. He was reportedly provided with purple blankets. Now, purple in ancient Rome wasn't just any purple. We're talking about Tyrian purple, a dye so incredibly expensive that its use was largely restricted to emperors and high-ranking officials. It was made from thousands of tiny murex sea snails, a painstaking and incredibly costly process. So, Incitatus wasn't just sleeping on soft linens. He was sleeping on a fortune. It's like tucking your pet into bed with a duvet made of pure gold, but softer. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a mainstream historical fact that Tyrian purple symbolized imperial power and wealth, making Incitatus's blankets a powerful visual statement. His diet, too, was nothing short of extravagant. Incitatus was fed specially prepared oats, often mixed with gold flakes. Yes, gold. Not for any nutritional benefit, of course, but purely for show and prestige. He even drank from a golden goblet. You might find yourself comparing his breakfast to your own, and feeling a little envious. No gold flakes in my oatmeal, you might grumble, or perhaps just sigh contentedly as you drift further into the story. Historians still argue whether the gold flakes were literal, finely ground gold, or simply a metaphorical description of the oats being served in a golden vessel. Either way, it suggests an unparalleled level of pampering. The horse also had a retinue of devoted servants. Suetonius, one of our key ancient sources, mentions that Incitatus had 18 attendants. Think about that. 18 people whose sole job was to ensure this horse's comfort, cleanliness, and happiness. They would groom him until his white coat gleamed, polish his hooves, prepare his opulent meals, and probably fetch him tiny horse-sized massages. You can almost hear the soft whispers of the grooms, the gentle swish of brushes, and the occasional contented whicker from Incitatus himself. It sounds like a rather relaxing job, honestly, compared to, say, fighting in the legions or balancing the imperial budget. But it wasn't just about physical comfort. Caligula reportedly treated Incitatus as an equal, even an intellectual companion. He would confide in the horse, discussing matters of state, expressing his frustrations, and perhaps even sharing his darkest desires. Imagine eavesdropping on such a conversation. The emperor, a figure of immense power, pouring his heart out to a horse who would only offer a soft snort in response. It's a bizarre image, but one that paints a vivid picture of Caligula's isolation and his peculiar way of coping with the burdens of imperial power. The luxurious daily routine also extended to his rest. On the night before a race, Caligula would reportedly impose silence throughout the entire neighborhood where Incitatus's stable was located. Anyone making too much noise risked punishment. Imagine living next door to the emperor's horse and having to tiptoe around at night, just to ensure Incitatus got his beauty sleep. You probably had more freedom to throw a loud party than most Roman citizens living near the imperial stables. It makes you realize just how utterly absolute and arbitrary Caligula's power had become. This whole setup, from the ivory manger to the gold-flaked oats and the silent nights, highlights a quirky tidbit about Roman society. While animals were often valued, this level of reverence for a horse was truly extraordinary. It went far beyond the typical respect for a champion warhorse or a prized racing animal. It was a bizarre, almost theatrical, display of Caligula's power and his disdain for conventional norms. And it's this unique, lavish daily life that sets the stage for the even more incredible stories that would emerge about Incitatus. With Incitatus now living a life of unparalleled equine luxury, His prominence within Caligula's court wasn't confined to the opulence of his stable. Oh no. You're now drifting through the grand public spaces of the imperial palace, perhaps feeling the soft breeze from an open courtyard, or hearing the distant murmur of conversation, as we explore Incitatus's remarkable role in public appearances and imperial feasts. His presence was not just tolerated, it was a celebrated and often unsettling feature of Caligula's reign. Picture this. You're at a lavish Roman banquet, the air thick with the aroma of roasted meats, exotic spices, and fine wines. Senators, nobles, and foreign dignitaries are arrayed on comfortable couches, reclining as they feast. The entertainment is extravagant. Dancers, musicians, perhaps a poet reciting an epic. And then there, at the emperor's table, sits Incitatus. Not just nearby, mind you, but reportedly right at the table, a place usually reserved for the most esteemed human guests. He would be served gilded oats from a golden goblet, a sight that must have been both astonishing and deeply unsettling to Caligula's human courtiers. Imagine trying to make polite conversation with a senator while a horse next to you is delicately munching on oats infused with actual gold. You might stifle a giggle, but remember, this was a display of power, not just peculiar pet ownership. This practice of having Incitatus at imperial banquets is a mainstream historical fact, recounted by ancient historians like Suetonius. For them, it was another stark piece of evidence for Caligula's alleged madness and his deliberate acts of provocation against the Roman elite. It wasn't merely about affection, it was about humiliation. By placing an animal in a position of such honor, Caligula was, in essence, signaling his utter disdain for the human aristocracy, implicitly suggesting that his horse was more worthy of respect than the most powerful men in Rome. You can almost feel the uncomfortable silence that might have fallen over the banquets, punctuated only by Incitatus's contented chewing. Beyond the dining table, Incitatus also played a part in public spectacles. While his main racing career might have been winding down as he transitioned into his imperial pet role, he was still paraded in grand processions. Imagine the emperor, riding not in a chariot, but perhaps leading Incitatus in a triumphal procession, or showcasing him in the Circus Maximus before races. The crowds, who had once cheered him as a champion, now saw him as a symbol of their erratic emperor's power. It's a curious tidbit that an animal could become such a prominent figure in the public eye, almost a living emblem of the imperial court. Historians still argue whether Caligula's public displays with Incitatus were purely spontaneous acts of bizarre affection, or carefully calculated political maneuvers designed to send a clear message of his absolute authority. Was he genuinely so enamored with his horse that he couldn't bear to be parted from him, even at state dinners? Or was he cynically using Incitatus to mock and degrade the Senate, forcing them to acknowledge an animal as their equal, or even their superior, in the emperor's eyes? It's a debate that goes to the heart of understanding Caligula's reign. Was it madness, or was it a terrifyingly effective form of tyranny? These public appearances, whether at feasts or in processions, served to further cement Incitatus's unique status. He was no longer just a horse. He was Incitatus, the emperor's horse. His image would have been known throughout Rome, a constant, living testament to Caligula's unpredictable whims. You might even hear whispers among the common folk, stories about the horse's immense wealth and influence, perhaps even leading to exaggerated tales that bordered on the mythical. One can only imagine the conversations among the Roman elite. Did you see Incitatus at the banquet last night? He looked rather fetching in his new jeweled bridle. Yes, but did you notice the way he eyed Senator so-and-so's dessert? I hear he prefers figs to dates. It's a rather absurd image, but it highlights the reality of a court where the emperor's favorite horse commanded more attention, and perhaps even more respect, than many human beings. This forced acceptance of Incitatus's elevated status further demonstrated Caligula's absolute authority, an authority that no one dared question, not when the emperor himself treated his horse as an equal. As Incitatus reveled in his life of gold-flaked oats and imperial banquets, the rumors about his political ascension began to circulate, reaching an almost absurd peak. You're now floating through the hushed corridors of the Roman Senate, perhaps catching whispers of nervous laughter and outright disbelief. This is where the story of Incitatus truly enters the realm of historical legend. The outlandish claim that Caligula intended to make his horse a consul. The consulship was the highest elected political office in the Roman Republic, and, though its power was diminished under the empire, it still held immense prestige and symbolic importance. Consuls presided over the Senate, commanded armies, and gave their name to the year, a deeply ingrained part of Roman identity. To suggest that a horse could hold such a position was not merely eccentric. It was a profound insult to every senator, every noble family, and every cherished Roman tradition. You can almost feel the collective intake of breath, perhaps a few involuntary splutters, as the rumor first reached the ears of the Roman elite. Ancient sources, most notably Suetonius, explicitly mention Caligula's supposed intention to appoint Incitatus as a consul. While the act itself was never fully completed before Caligula's assassination, the threat or intention was enough to send shockwaves through Roman society. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a mainstream historical fact that this specific rumor became one of the most enduring symbols of Caligula's perceived madness and his contempt for the traditional Roman aristocracy. Imagine the headlines in a Roman newspaper, if such a thing existed: "Horse for consul? Emperor's latest insult." Historians still argue whether Caligula genuinely intended to appoint Incitatus as a consul, or if this was merely a cruel joke, a calculated act of psychological warfare against a Senate he despised and sought to subjugate. Was he truly so detached from reality that he believed a horse could govern? Or was he using the outrageousness of the proposal as a means to belittle and terrify the senators, demonstrating that their esteemed positions meant nothing in the face of his absolute power? It's a debate that highlights the difficulty in interpreting the actions of a ruler whose behavior seemed designed to defy all rational explanation. If the appointment had gone through, Incitatus would have been provided with a consular house, complete with servants, and a full retinue. He would have worn the toga praetexta, the official toga bordered with a broad purple stripe, the symbol of consular office. You can almost picture it: Incitatus, draped in purple, presiding over a Senate meeting, perhaps occasionally neighing in approval or disapproval. It would certainly have made for a memorable session, if not a productive one. And honestly, some senators might have preferred the horse's company to that of their human colleagues. At least the horse wouldn't scheme against them. The sheer audacity of the idea was designed to underscore Caligula's absolute authority. By proposing to elevate an animal to the highest political office, he was stripping the Senate of its dignity and its remaining shred of influence. He was showing them, unequivocally, that he held all the power, and he could bestow it upon anyone or anything he chose, regardless of their species or intellectual capacity. It was a masterclass in psychological torment, disguised as imperial eccentricity. The rumor of the consulship was a particularly potent symbol because it attacked the very foundation of Roman governance and social order. Consuls were the embodiment of Roman civic virtue, the leaders chosen to guide the republic, and later, to give legitimacy to the empire. To replace them with a horse was to declare the entire system a farce. It was a power move so outrageous, so disrespectful, that it has echoed through history for 2 millennia. forever linking Caligula with his beloved Incitatus and the maddening suggestion of an equine consul. It certainly beats the office Christmas party for awkward moments. As the rumors of Incitatus's potential consulship spread like wildfire through Rome, they ignited a fierce scholarly debate that continues to this day. You're now quietly observing the silent discussions among historians across millennia, perhaps hearing the faint rustle of ancient papyrus and the gentle tapping of modern keyboards. This section delves into the ongoing arguments surrounding Caligula's sanity and, by extension, the true nature of Incitatus's remarkable status. Was Caligula truly insane? This is the central question that historians still argue whether his erratic, often cruel, and utterly bizarre behavior stemmed from genuine madness, or if it was a calculated performance. Some ancient Roman historians, particularly Suetonius and Cassius Dio, portray him as a megalomaniac and a sadist, descending into madness after his severe illness early in his reign. They point to his self-deification, his cruelty towards the Senate, his sexual excesses, and, of course, his relationship with Incitatus, as clear signs of a mind unhinged. You can almost hear their disapproving whispers from across the centuries, shaking their heads at the sheer impropriety of it all. However, more modern interpretations offer alternative perspectives. Some scholars suggest that Caligula's illness, possibly encephalitis, could have caused genuine brain damage, leading to cognitive and behavioral changes. This medical explanation provides a more sympathetic, albeit still disturbing, lens through which to view his reign. Others argue that his madness was a deliberate and cynical political strategy. In this view, Caligula was not insane, but a ruthless tyrant who intentionally acted in outrageous ways to consolidate his power and terrorize the Roman elite. By humiliating the Senate, demeaning traditional offices, and elevating a horse, he demonstrated his absolute authority and their utter powerlessness. It's like a very extreme, ancient version of shock marketing, designed to leave no doubt as to who was in charge. The role of Incitatus in this debate is crucial. If Caligula was truly mad, then his obsession with Incitatus, the ivory manger, the golden goblet, and the consulship rumors are simply symptoms of his mental deterioration. It's a tragic, if bizarre, manifestation of his illness. But if he was a calculating tyrant, then Incitatus becomes a tool, a prop in a meticulously crafted, terrifying display of power. The horse was a symbol of Caligula's contempt for tradition and his ability to subvert the established order at will. Imagine the sheer audacity of forcing the most powerful men in Rome to consider a horse as a potential colleague. It's enough to make you want to pull your toga over your head and go back to sleep. A quirky tidbit in this debate involves the nature of ancient historical sources themselves. Much of what we know about Caligula comes from writers like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, who wrote decades after his death and often relied on gossip and unflattering anecdotes. These historians lived under later emperors who might have had an interest in portraying Caligula as a monstrous tyrant to legitimize their own rule. Therefore, separating historical fact from sensationalized rumor becomes a significant challenge for modern scholars. You have to read between the lines, almost like trying to decipher a dream after you've just woken up. Was Incitatus truly given golden oats, or was that an embellishment to highlight Caligula's extravagance? This leads to a mainstream historical fact. The reigns of bad emperors like Caligula, Nero, and Domitian are often subject to intense scrutiny and conflicting accounts, precisely because their actions defy easy categorization. Their stories become cautionary tales, exaggerated to serve later political agendas. The Incitatus story, in particular, seems almost too perfect, too outlandish, to be entirely true, yet it's consistently reported by multiple ancient authors. This makes it a fascinating puzzle for historians to unravel. Ultimately, historians still argue whether Caligula's actions regarding Incitatus were the result of madness, a cynical display of power, or simply the bizarre excesses of an emperor who believed himself a living god and was accountable to no one. There's no definitive answer, which is perhaps why the story continues to captivate us. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white, often existing in shades of purple and gold, just like Incitatus's lavish life. And as you consider these intricate historical puzzles, perhaps your mind will begin to unwind, slowly drifting towards a peaceful slumber. As the echoes of scholarly debate about Caligula's sanity gently fade, you find yourself observing the imperial court, perhaps a quiet fly on a very expensive wall, as we delve into a less talked about aspect of Incitatus's elevated status. The rivalries and resentment his unique position undoubtedly sparked among Caligula's human courtiers. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the polite smiles masking seething jealousy, as a horse commanded more favor than most senators. Imagine, for a moment, being a highly educated, aristocratic Roman senator, proud of your lineage, your military service, your rhetorical skills. You've spent years climbing the ranks, navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics, only to find that the emperor's favorite confidant is a Spanish racehorse. You're forced to attend banquets where this horse dines from a golden goblet, while you might be struggling to gain a moment of the emperor's attention to discuss pressing matters of state. It's enough to make anyone feel a little put out. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a reflection of the intense social hierarchy and cutthroat competition within the Roman elite. Power was everything, and proximity to the emperor meant influence, wealth, and survival. When an emperor bestows such lavish gifts and public honor upon an animal, it's not merely a sign of affection. It's a deliberate snub to everyone else. The resentment must have festered, boiling beneath the surface of enforced politeness. You can almost hear the whispered complaints in the palace corridors, the subtle eye rolls, and the desperate attempts to ingratiate themselves with Caligula by perhaps bringing Incitatus his favorite treat. "Oh, glorious Incitatus! I've brought you the finest freshly milled oats from my ancestral villa." Historians still argue whether Caligula's elevation of Incitatus was purely a personal eccentricity or a calculated strategy to provoke and humiliate the Roman aristocracy, thereby consolidating his own absolute power. If it was the latter, it was undeniably effective. By forcing senators to acknowledge, and perhaps even pay homage to, his horse, Caligula was systematically dismantling their dignity and demonstrating his own supreme authority. He was essentially telling them, "Your status means nothing compared to my whims. I can elevate a horse above you, and you will bow to it." It's a rather brutal way to assert dominance, even if it does involve a very handsome horse. Think of the sheer frustration. Here you are, a seasoned politician, trying to debate a new tax law or a military campaign, and the emperor is more interested in ensuring his horse has the perfect bedtime story. It's like trying to have a serious meeting with your boss, and they're constantly distracted by their goldfish. Except, in this case, the goldfish might be appointed to a high-ranking position in the company. You might even find yourself wondering if it would be more efficient to simply send your proposals directly to Incitatus, hoping he'd whisper them into Caligula's ear during their private moments. The level of public humiliation would have been immense. For an ancient Roman, honor and public perception were paramount. To be seen as less important than an animal, no matter how magnificent, was a profound blow to one's social standing. This would have created an atmosphere of fear and sycophancy, where courtiers might have gone to ridiculous lengths to appease the emperor, even if it meant praising his horse's latest pronouncements or offering it unsolicited back scratches. It's a mainstream historical fact that flattery and outward obedience were essential for survival in tyrannical courts, and Caligula's was no exception. This resentment, however, was rarely expressed openly. You couldn't just walk up to Caligula and say, "Your Majesty, with all due respect, your horse is not fit for the consulship." That would be a one-way ticket to a very unpleasant historical footnote. Instead, it would have manifested in hushed conversations, bitter jokes, and perhaps even quiet plots. The story of Incitatus, therefore, isn't just a quirky tale of imperial pet ownership. It's a window into the psychological warfare waged by a tyrannical emperor against his own elite, using a beloved animal as a weapon of humiliation. And as you imagine these silent struggles for dignity, perhaps your own worries will seem a little less significant, gently fading into the calming narrative. Having explored the simmering resentment surrounding Incitatus, let's now step further into the heart of Caligula's domain and observe the bizarre, often terrifying, daily life within the imperial palace itself. You're no longer just an observer. You're almost a ghostly presence, drifting through marble halls where every shadow might hide a secret, and every whisper could be a conspiracy. This glimpse into the palace's routines will further illuminate the environment in which Incitatus thrived. The Palatine Hill, where the imperial residence stood, was the very center of Roman power, a sprawling complex of magnificent buildings, gardens, and private apartments. But under Caligula, it became a stage for his unpredictable whims. Daily life wasn't governed by predictable schedules or traditional etiquette. It was dictated by the emperor's moods, which could swing wildly from jovial generosity to terrifying rage in an instant. You might wake to the sound of distant revelry, only to find the palace eerily silent hours later, hinting at some unknown imperial decree or personal vendetta. It was like living in a very expensive, very dangerous reality show. Caligula frequently held lavish banquets, often late into the night, which we've already touched upon with Incitatus's attendance. But beyond the food and entertainment, these events were often opportunities for the emperor to display his power, sometimes through humiliation. Senators might be forced to perform demeaning tasks, or witness shocking spectacles. Imagine being a guest, trying to enjoy your peacock tongue, while simultaneously wondering if you'll be the target of the emperor's next joke. It truly makes you appreciate the relative calm of your own evenings. A mainstream historical fact about Roman palaces is their complex layout, designed to accommodate a vast household, including dozens, if not hundreds, of slaves, freedmen, courtiers, and soldiers. These individuals all had specific roles, from managing the imperial wardrobe to preparing elaborate meals. The palace was a self-contained city, a microcosm of Rome itself, with its own hierarchies, gossip networks, and power struggles. And in the midst of all this human complexity, an animal, Incitatus, held a uniquely privileged position, walking the same floors and breathing the same perfumed air as the most powerful people in the empire. Caligula's fascination with being worshipped as a living god also dictated much of the palace's routine. He would demand reverence, and some sources suggest he even dressed as various deities. Imagine waking up to find your emperor dressed as Jupiter, complete with a lightning bolt, demanding your prayers. It certainly spiced up the morning routine. This desire for divine status meant that every interaction within the palace was imbued with a heightened sense of theatricality and risk. You had to choose your words carefully, your gestures precisely, lest you offend a mortal who believed himself immortal. A quirky tidbit about daily life in the palace under Caligula involves his notorious secret passages and hidden chambers. Ancient accounts speak of rooms designed for unexpected encounters, or perhaps for quietly disposing of those who displeased him. The palace wasn't just a home, it was a labyrinth of power, surveillance, and potential peril. You can almost feel the chill in the air as you pass a darkened doorway, wondering what strange secrets it might hold. This atmosphere of paranoia and unpredictability undoubtedly shaped the behavior of everyone within its walls, from the highest-ranking senator to the lowliest slave, making Incitatus's stable a comparatively safe and predictable haven. Historians still argue whether Caligula's theatrical displays of divinity and power were true delusions, or if he was intentionally adopting the persona of a terrifying god-king to break the spirit of the Roman elite and assert absolute monarchical control. The way he manipulated the daily routines of the palace, transforming it from a mere residence into a stage for his terrifying performance, is a testament to his unique approach to emperorship. It wasn't just about ruling, it was about dominating every aspect of his subjects' lives, including their perception of reality. And in this bizarre, fear-soaked environment, the unblinking, calm presence of Incitatus must have been a strange constant, a beacon of simplicity in a world of complex, dangerous madness. As the day unwinds within the palace, the sounds begin to soften. The distant murmur of conversation, the gentle splash of a fountain in a hidden courtyard, perhaps even the soft, rhythmic breathing of Incitatus in his luxurious stable. You can almost feel the weight of the day, the strange mix of opulence and fear, slowly settling over you as you begin to drift. Stepping out of the bizarre daily routines of Caligula's palace, you now find yourself pondering a more abstract, yet crucial question. What was Incitatus's true influence? You're floating through the unseen currents of Roman power, where symbolism often held as much weight as direct action, as we consider theories on the horse's symbolic or even practical power. Was he merely a pampered pet, or did he, inadvertently or otherwise, exert a subtle form of influence within the imperial court? On the surface, it's easy to dismiss Incitatus as simply a prop, a living testament to Caligula's madness. However, in an absolute monarchy, where an emperor's whims were law, even a favored animal could become a conduit for power, a focus for flattery, or a barometer of the emperor's mood. Think about it. If you wanted to curry favor with Caligula, perhaps you would praise Incitatus's magnificent coat, or remark on his intelligence, or even offer to personally oversee the polishing of his ivory manger. Such sycophantic gestures, aimed at the horse, were in reality directed at the emperor. This isn't just a quirky tidbit, it's a reflection of how power dynamics work in tyrannical regimes. When direct challenge is impossible, people find indirect ways to navigate the system. The horse, by virtue of his relationship with the emperor, became a part of that system. Courtiers might have found it safer to discuss certain topics indirectly through the presence of Incitatus, or to gauge Caligula's mood by observing his interactions with his beloved steed. Oh, the emperor patted Incitatus on the nose today. Perhaps now is a good time to ask for that promotion. Historians still argue whether Incitatus genuinely held any practical influence beyond being a symbol of Caligula's eccentricity. Was he ever truly consulted, even in a symbolic sense, on matters of state? While the idea of a horse deliberating on a new tax law is absurd, the perception that Caligula valued Incitatus's opinion over that of his human advisors would have significantly undermined the authority of the Senate and imperial administration. It reinforces the idea that Caligula's power was absolute, unfettered by tradition or human counsel. It's like your boss saying they'll only approve your project if their cat gives it a thumbs up. Pretty demoralizing, right? A mainstream historical fact is that Roman emperors often used symbols and displays of power to project their authority. From grand architectural projects to lavish public games, Every imperial act carried a message. Incitatus, in his gilded splendor, was a living, breathing symbol of Caligula's unparalleled might and his contempt for conventional norms. He was a constant, tangible reminder that the emperor defied all expectations, and that no one, not even the most esteemed senator, was safe from his capricious will. You can almost feel the weight of this symbolic oppression pressing down on the Roman elite. Furthermore, Incitatus might have had a practical influence in a very subtle way, as a source of comfort and stability for Caligula. In a world of constant plots, betrayals, and political maneuvering, a horse offers unwavering loyalty and affection. For an emperor who seemed to trust no one, Incitatus might have been his sole confidant, his emotional anchor in a sea of paranoia. This private solace, while not political in the traditional sense, could have indirectly shaped Caligula's state of mind, perhaps even influencing his decisions, simply by providing a moment of calm or a feeling of unconditional acceptance. The very absurdity of Incitatus's elevation amplified Caligula's perceived omnipotence. If the emperor could make his horse a consul, what couldn't he do? This unbridled power, demonstrated through such outlandish acts, cultivated an atmosphere of fear and unquestioning obedience. Incitatus, therefore, became an unwitting participant in a grand psychological experiment, a living testament to the dangers of unchecked authority. So, while Incitatus never signed a decree or commanded a legion, his influence was profound in its symbolic weight and its reflection of Caligula's tyrannical control. He was more than a pet. He was a silent, magnificent actor in one of history's most bizarre imperial dramas. And as you consider these intricate layers of ancient power and influence, perhaps your mind will begin to unwind, slowly drifting towards a peaceful slumber, far from the machinations of Roman courts. The story of Incitatus's peculiar influence inevitably leads us to the dramatic climax of Caligula's reign, his downfall. You're now sensing a shift in the palace atmosphere, a growing tension, like the calm before a storm, as we explore the events that culminated in the emperor's violent assassination. This was not a slow fade into history. It was a sudden, brutal end. By 41 CE, Caligula had alienated nearly everyone who mattered in Rome. His erratic behavior, financial extravagance, humiliation of the Senate, and alleged cruelty had created a vast network of enemies. The initial popularity he enjoyed had evaporated, replaced by widespread fear and resentment. You can almost feel the collective sigh of exasperation, or perhaps just a very deep, nervous breath, permeating the city. It was becoming increasingly clear that Rome couldn't continue under such unpredictable and dangerous leadership. It's like having a housemate who keeps setting fire to the curtains. Eventually, something has to give. The conspiracy to assassinate Caligula was extensive, involving members of the Praetorian Guard, senators, and disgruntled courtiers. The Praetorian Guard, ironically, were the very soldiers who had helped secure his ascent to power. But even their loyalty had been stretched thin by Caligula's capricious treatment and perceived slights. Their leader, Cassius Chaerea, a military tribune, felt personally insulted by the emperor's mocking of his supposedly effeminate voice. Such a seemingly trivial slight could ignite a deadly plot when combined with widespread discontent. This quirky tidbit highlights how personal grievances could intertwine with broader political unrest in Roman power struggles. The assassination itself was brutal and chaotic. It occurred on January 24, 41 CE, after the Palatine Games, a series of theatrical performances and athletic contests held in the palace. Caligula was making his way through a secret passage, perhaps the very kind we mused about earlier, on his way to see a group of young actors rehearse. He was ambushed by Charia and other conspirators. They stabbed him repeatedly. Ancient sources describe him being struck over 30 times, a testament to the pent-up rage of his assassins. You can almost hear the frantic screams, the clash of steel, a stark contrast to the usual gentle hum of our narrative. This dramatic event is a mainstream historical fact, meticulously documented by Roman historians. Caligula's reign, which began with such promise, ended in a bloody coup after just under 4 years. The conspirators also killed his wife, Caesonia, and his young daughter, Julia Drusilla, effectively ending his direct line and ensuring no immediate claims to power from his family. It was a swift, decisive, and utterly ruthless act designed to erase his tyrannical legacy and prevent any potential avengers. Historians still argue whether Caligula's assassination was a desperate act of self-preservation by the Roman elite, a necessary evil to end a reign of terror, or simply a power grab by ambitious individuals. Was it a justified regicide or a ruthless coup? The debate reflects the complex moral landscape of Roman politics, where the line between tyrant and victim was often blurred. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, the powerful faced very real and very immediate consequences for their actions. The immediate aftermath was pure pandemonium. The Praetorian Guard, in their confusion and grief, or perhaps a desire to assert their authority, began indiscriminately killing senators and others in the palace. For a brief period, Rome plunged into uncertainty, with the future of the empire hanging in the balance. It was a chaotic end to a chaotic reign, a final, violent flourish that underscored the dangers of absolute power without accountability. As the sounds of the struggle fade, leaving only the memory of a sudden, shocking end, you can almost feel the collective gasp of relief, mixed with lingering fear, that must have swept through Rome. The emperor was gone, but what would come next? And what would become of his strange companion, Incitatus, who had shared in his master's bizarre ascent? The world was about to change, and the horse's fate hung in the balance. With the violent echoes of Caligula's assassination now fading into the past, you find yourself wondering about the fate of his most famous companion. What became of Incitatus, the pampered racehorse who lived a life of imperial luxury, dining from golden goblets and almost becoming a consul? His destiny, much like his life, holds a peculiar place in history. After Caligula's abrupt and bloody end, the new emperor, Claudius, who was literally found hiding behind a curtain during the chaos, took the throne. Claudius was a much more pragmatic and traditional ruler than his predecessor, known for his administrative reforms and military conquests, not for elevating horses to political office. So, you can imagine that Incitatus's days of ivory mangers and gold-flaked oats were probably numbered, or at least, significantly downgraded. You might even feel a pang of sympathy for the horse, suddenly stripped of his immense privileges. It's like being the favorite pet of a tech billionaire and then suddenly finding yourself living with a very sensible accountant. Ancient sources are, unfortunately, a bit sparse on the exact details of Incitatus's post-Caligula life. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a common challenge for historians, as the focus often shifts immediately to the new emperor and the major political events. A horse, even a famous one, usually drops out of the historical narrative once his human patron is gone. However, the most commonly accepted account, still debated by historians, suggests that Incitatus was simply stripped of his luxurious trappings and returned to a more ordinary equine existence. Some accounts imply that he was simply put back into a regular stable and, perhaps, even returned to racing, though without the imperial fanfare. Others suggest he might have been sold or retired. It's unlikely he would have been harmed, as killing a valuable, if eccentric, racehorse would have been seen as wasteful and unnecessarily cruel by many, even by the Romans. There's a quiet dignity in this presumed return to normalcy, isn't there? From the pinnacle of imperial excess to the simple life of a horse once more. You can almost picture him, munching on regular oats, perhaps occasionally whinnying at the memory of purple blankets, but generally content. A mainstream historical fact related to this period is the swift and often ruthless way new Roman emperors dealt with the legacies of their predecessors, especially unpopular ones. Statues were pulled down, names were erased from public monuments, and associates of the former regime often faced severe consequences. In this context, Incitatus getting off relatively lightly, merely being demoted from his imperial privilege, speaks volumes. It suggests that even the new, more sensible regime recognized his status as more of a peculiar symbol of Caligula's madness rather than a genuine threat or a co-conspirator. No charges of treason were laid against him, which is a relief. Historians still argue whether Incitatus's survival was a testament to his actual innocence, the pragmatic nature of Claudius, or simply the fact that he was, after all, just a horse, and thus not truly culpable for the emperor's actions. Was he lucky to escape punishment, or was it never even a consideration for a non-human? The very silence of the sources about his ultimate fate suggests that he ceased to be an object of political significance once Caligula was gone. So, while the glittering, bizarre chapter of his life as an almost consul ended abruptly, Incitatus likely lived out his days in relative peace, far from the perils and eccentricities of the imperial court. He became a historical footnote, a vivid, quirky tidbit used to illustrate the incredible oddities of Caligula's reign. You can almost feel the peaceful rhythm of his new, quieter life, a stark contrast to the dramatic events that had defined his earlier years. The golden goblet was gone, the ivory manger perhaps repurposed, but the fields remained, and the simple joy of being a horse, perhaps, returned. From his demotion from imperial favor, Incitatus now gallops into the annals of history, forever linked with his extraordinary master. You're now quietly observing how time and anecdote have shaped the memory of this peculiar friendship, cementing its place as one of the most enduring, if bizarre, stories of ancient Rome. The legacy of Incitatus is inextricably tied to the infamy of Caligula. For centuries, the story of the horse who almost became a consul has served as a primary example of Caligula's alleged madness, his unchecked arrogance, and his contempt for the Roman establishment. When historians and moralists of later eras wanted to illustrate the dangers of tyrannical power or the depths of imperial depravity, Incitatus was often trotted out as the perfect, bizarre anecdote. He became shorthand for extreme, inexplicable imperial whim. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from Roman senators long gone, their frustration at being overshadowed by an equine. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a mainstream historical fact that ancient historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio used the Incitatus narrative as a crucial piece of evidence in their damning portrayals of Caligula. They saw it not just as an amusing story, but as a serious indictment of an emperor who had thoroughly disgraced the dignity of his office. The more outlandish the detail, the ivory manger, the golden goblet, the consulship, the more effectively it served their purpose of showing Caligula as a madman. Historians still argue whether the story of Incitatus and the consulship was fully embellished over time, or if it reflects a genuine, albeit eccentric, intention by Caligula. While the idea of a horse becoming a consul is undeniably outlandish, the core story has persisted for 2 millennia across various sources. This persistence suggests there's at least a kernel of truth to the emperor's intense favoritism and his desire to mock the Roman Senate. Was it pure historical fact, or a very compelling rumor that grew legs, much like Incitatus himself? The debate ensures the story remains fascinating. The memory of Incitatus also highlights the complex relationship between Roman emperors and their animals. While many emperors had favorite pets or prized animals, none reached the level of public veneration or controversy that Incitatus did. He stands as a unique figure, a testament to how far an emperor's personal affections could stray from the expected norms, and how deeply those eccentricities could impact the perception of their reign. You might find yourself comparing it to modern celebrity pets, though none of them, thankfully, are rumored to be running for public office. Beyond the historical texts, Incitatus has entered popular culture as a symbol of absurd power and bizarre companionship. He appears in literature, plays, and even video games, often as a comical yet unsettling representation of unchecked authority. This enduring presence speaks to the universal appeal of an outlandish story, a tale that pushes the boundaries of belief and makes us question the true nature of power and sanity. He's arguably more famous than many actual Roman consuls, which is quite the achievement for a horse. The story serves as a cautionary tale, but also a source of gentle amusement. It reminds us that even the most powerful figures in history could be driven by personal passions that defy all logic. Incitatus, the silent witness to Caligula's reign, is a fascinating character in his own right, a four-legged embodiment of an era defined by its excesses. And as you consider how this strange tale has been passed down through generations, perhaps your mind will begin to unwind, recognizing the subtle humor and underlying truths within the historical narrative. The very fact that we are still talking about him, after all this time, means Incitatus, in his own way, truly achieved immortality. From his demotion from imperial favor, Incitatus now gallops into the annals of history, forever linked with his extraordinary master. You're now quietly observing how time and anecdote have shaped the memory of this peculiar friendship, cementing its place as one of the most enduring, if bizarre, stories of ancient Rome. The legacy of Incitatus is inextricably tied to the infamy of Caligula. For centuries, the story of the horse who almost became a consul has served as a primary example of Caligula's alleged madness, his unchecked arrogance, and his contempt for the Roman establishment. When historians and moralists of later eras wanted to illustrate the dangers of tyrannical power or the depths of imperial depravity, Incitatus was often trotted out as the perfect, bizarre anecdote. He became shorthand for extreme, inexplicable imperial whim. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from Roman senators long gone, their frustration at being overshadowed by an equine. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a mainstream historical fact that ancient historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio used the Incitatus narrative as a crucial piece of evidence in their damning portrayals of Caligula. They saw it not just as an amusing story, but as a serious indictment of an emperor who had thoroughly disgraced the dignity of his office. The more outlandish the detail, the ivory manger, the golden goblet, the consulship, the more effectively it served their purpose of showing Caligula as a madman. Historians still argue whether the story of Incitatus and the consulship was fully embellished over time, or if it reflects a genuine, albeit eccentric, intention by Caligula. While the idea of a horse becoming a consul is undeniably outlandish, the core story has persisted for 2 millennia across various sources. This persistence suggests there's at least a kernel of truth to the emperor's intense favoritism and his desire to mock the Roman Senate. Was it pure historical fact, or a very compelling rumor that grew legs, much like Incitatus himself? The debate ensures the story remains fascinating. The memory of Incitatus also highlights the complex relationship between Roman emperors and their animals. While many emperors had favorite pets or prized animals, none reached the level of public veneration or controversy that Incitatus did. He stands as a unique figure, a testament to how far an emperor's personal affections could stray from the expected norms, and how deeply those eccentricities could impact the perception of their reign. You might find yourself comparing it to modern celebrity pets, though none of them, thankfully, are rumored to be running for public office. Beyond the historical texts, Incitatus has entered popular culture as a symbol of absurd power and bizarre companionship. He appears in literature, plays, and even video games, often as a comical yet unsettling representation of unchecked authority. This enduring presence speaks to the universal appeal of an outlandish story, a tale that pushes the boundaries of belief and makes us question the true nature of power and sanity. He's arguably more famous than many actual Roman consuls, which is quite the achievement for a horse. The story serves as a cautionary tale, but also a source of gentle amusement. It reminds us that even the most powerful figures in history could be driven by personal passions that defy all logic. Incitatus, the silent witness to Caligula's reign, is a fascinating character in his own right, a four-legged embodiment of an era defined by its excesses. And as you consider how this strange tale has been passed down through generations, perhaps your mind will begin to unwind, recognizing the subtle humor and underlying truths within the historical narrative. The very fact that we are still talking about him, after all this time, means Incitatus, in his own way, truly achieved immortality.